In the heart of Olorin stood the great Irako, a tree so old its roots were believed to touch the earth's soul. From its bleeding wound flowed a sacred crimson sap, the lifeblood of a people whose identity was forever tied to its bark. Elder Kwasi, keeper of ancient truths, gathered the village children beneath the Irako's shade. His words painted legends, of sap being the joyful tears of the earth, an offering for Olorin's peace and prosperity. The sap anointed newborns, blessed harvests, and armored warriors. With each drop, it whispered a tale of life, strength, and divine favor, its power woven into every ceremony of Olorin. Adana, the village's gifted storyteller, bore the songs of her ancestors. Her voice, smooth as honey, carried the heartbeat of Olorin as villagers gathered nightly to drink from her well of stories. But something had changed. The sap no longer trickled, it wept. The scar widened as though mourning, and what once felt sacred now seemed like sorrow. Adana watched in silence. The stories she recited now rang hollow in her chest. The tree was trying to speak, not with joy but with grief, and her heart ached with questions no tale had answered. A strange wind brushed through Olorin, carrying a scent, coppery and raw. The tree no longer offered peace, but a silent scream that echoed through Adana's soul. That evening, her story of victory beneath the Irako ended not in cheer but in hushed murmurs. The tree loomed behind her, bleeding more than ever, its silence louder than drums. Unable to bear the weight of her unease, Adana turned to Elder Kwasi. Her voice trembled with reverence and fear. "Can the tree feel pain? Are we blind to its sorrow?" Kwasi's milky eyes glistened. "The heart of a storyteller must always be listened to," he said. "But sometimes, the truth is a story not yet told." Elder Kwasi's usually serene face darkened, as if a forgotten shadow passed over his soul. "Some stories," he said, "are too heavy for the young to carry." But Adana's heart burned with questions, the kind no elder's dismissal could silence. Alone in her hut, Adana stared at the gourd of sacred sap. It shimmered crimson in the lamplight, and all she could smell was sorrow. The songs of her grandmother echoed in her head, fragments now, pieces of a truth too long ignored. When the village slept, Adana walked under the silver eye of the moon, drawn by the heavy silence of the square. Her feet moved like whispers over the ground, her lamp casting trembling shadows. Before her stood the great Irako. The sap no longer trickled, it wept. She touched its bark and felt a pulse beneath it. And in a flash, a vision. A warrior's face, terrified, seared into her mind. The stories were wrong. The songs were incomplete. The Irako was not celebrating, it was mourning. And the pain it carried was not just its own but that of a forgotten sacrifice buried by time. Jide's home was more than a dwelling. It was a sanctuary of memory. On every wall were faded tapestries, hand-drawn songs, and artifacts of a time unspoken. The air thrummed with untold tales. "Why do you come, child of stories?" Jide asked without looking up. His voice was like a dry wind over stone. Adana bowed. "Because the tree weeps, and I need to know why." Jide reached for a cloth tucked behind his loom. "This was woven in my father's time. They said it was madness." He unfolded it, on it, a warrior kneeling beneath the bleeding tree. Adana realized the truth might not lie in the chants or the scrolls, but deep beneath the Irako itself. "The sacrifice," she whispered. "What was buried, and who?" Jide looked up, his eyes twinkling with fondness and memory. "Adana, the golden-voiced one, what brings you to this dusty corner? Have you come to tell me a story?" Adana stood at the threshold, her voice steady. "I have come to ask for a story, Jide. An old one, a very old one." Adana spoke of the great Irako, its bleeding bark and the sorrowful scent that lingered in the air. She told of Elder Kwasi's dismissal and the vision that haunted her. Jide's fingers rested on the loom. Still, a shadow crossed his wrinkled face. Ah, the truth, a dangerous thing for a storyteller to seek. The story of the bleeding tree. It is not a story of a single day, but of many. They sing of the great peace, Jide murmured. But they do not speak of the great deceit. The elders chose to remember the end of the song, not its haunting beginning. He spoke of a time before peace, when Olorin and the people of the sun fought bitterly. Two villages, divided by a river, their sons slain over water and soil. The great Irako then was just a tree, a silent witness. Our ancestors, Jide whispered, were led by Chief Obi, cunning, feared, a man who bent stories to his will. On the other side stood Chief Femi, strong yet weary, desperate to stop the dying. Chief Obi proposed a truce, a great feast beneath the Irako. 30 warriors from the Sun People came, their hopes pinned on unity. Music, wine, laughter, but beneath the leaves lay betrayal. Jide's voice dropped low, mournful. They danced, they drank, they trusted, and then the ground gave way. A silence fell, as if even the loom refused to move. Hidden Oloran warriors surrounded the pit, weapons drawn. Chief Obi watched from the edge, smiling. The blood of the sun, he said, will fertilize our land. His betrayal was the seed of a cursed peace. Adana leaned forward, eyes wide, breath caught in her throat. The rhythm of Jide's voice, like a spell unwinding, carried with it a burden older than memory. She now knew the wound in the tree was not just of bark, but of blood and betrayal. Adana gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The vision of the terrified warrior flashed again in her mind. It wasn't a celebration. It had been a massacre, hidden behind the veil of peace. The tree, Adana whispered, her eyes shimmering. It drank their blood. Jide nodded. The sap is not a blessing. It is the blood of the betrayed. Adana stood up slowly. The beautiful stories she had woven were lies. Her grandmother's gift, her voice, was now a burden. The truth had found her. You must not, Jide said with urgency. The elders won't hear you. The truth will tear our village apart. As Adana walked out of Jide's hut, the sun still shone over Olorin. But to her, the world was cloaked in a deep, chilling shadow. Days passed as Adana pored over ancient palm fiber scrolls. Each word revealed a piece of the great deceit. The scent of sorrow from the Irako tree never left her. Even when she slept, Adana could smell the blood-tinged sap, feel the weight of forgotten cries. The past clung to her like a haunting mist. She couldn't stand in the square and shout the truth. They would call her mad. But the council of elders must hear it. Somehow they must. Under the very tree that wept history's tears, the elders sat on carved stools. They waited in the shade, unaware that a storm of truth was about to break. Adana approached the council, her hands trembling. Her voice might shatter the peace, but silence would shatter her soul. Adana stood before the council of elders, her heart pounding like a drumbeat. Elder Kwasi's voice was ice-cold, stripped of affection. She had defied him, and now she would face the weight of tradition. A murmur crept through the circle like wind in dry leaves. Elder Ebel leaned forward, her voice sharp with suspicion. Half a story? She echoed. What other truth hides beneath our sacred tree? Adana's voice did not falter. The sap is not a blessing. It is grief. The blood of the people of the sun runs through the roots of the great Irako, spilled by deceit and betrayal. Outrage burst like thunder. The sacred tale they had passed from tongue to tongue now stood shattered by a single voice. Elder Kwasi rose, his fury unshackled. You speak blasphemy, child. But Adana stood firm. It is not blasphemy. It is truth, she cried. Jide has the scrolls. They tell of Femi's 30 warriors who came seeking peace and found only death. All eyes turned to Jide, the quiet weaver. The truth weighed heavy on his shoulders, but he stepped forward into the light. They are not fables, he said. They are the songs we buried. The council splintered. Some called it heresy. Others whispered of hidden truths. In their eyes flickered fear, for to alter a story was to unmake identity. Elder Kwasi's gaze wavered. In the faces of the council he saw it, doubt. The very foundation of their legend had begun to crack beneath the weight of forgotten truth. Adana's voice softened, pleading. It is not a curse, it is a wound. The tree weeps because it remembers what we chose to forget. Let us remember with it. A heavy silence settled over the square. The old story was no longer whole. And in that silence, the tree stood waiting, bleeding still, asking if Olorin would dare to remember. Her words lingered like a storm cloud. The elders, once immovable, now stared at the great Irako with unease. The bleeding trunk no longer sang of triumph. It mourned. Adana had broken something sacred yet necessary. News of Adana's revelation spread like wildfire. Families whispered, lovers argued, and the village of Olorin was no longer united. Some wept over gourds of sap. Others sharpened their tongues and knives. A group of young villagers, their hands trembling, smashed their gourds against the shrine of the Irako. The sap ran into the dust. Let the lie die, they cried. Let the truth breathe. Elder Kwasi, his eyes fierce with conviction, rallied the faithful. We will not be led astray by a girl's fantasy. Our ancestors are heroes, not butchers. His voice echoed like thunder. You're afraid of truth, Emeka shouted in the square. You'd rather live in a dream than face the pain of our past. The crowd roared in divided fury. Where once there had been dance and drum, now there were curses and silence. Children were pulled inside. The square became a battlefield of beliefs, echoing with ancient pain. Then the sky grew cruel. The clouds vanished. The rains that once sang through the leaves fell silent. The sun became a blade, and Olorin began to crack. The river receded like a frightened child. Its song was gone, replaced by the sound of dry wind and thirst. Women who once filled pots now walked further, only to return empty-handed. Desperate, the elders turned to the old gods. Incense rose. Chants filled the silence. Sacrifices were made at the foot of the Irako. But the skies remained deaf. The tree's sap thickened. No longer crimson, it darkened into pitch, a slow, tar-like ooze. It was no longer sorrow. It was retribution. The bleeding tree had awakened. Villagers stand in tense clusters outside their huts, some pointing toward Adana's hut in fear and anger. Their eyes burn with desperation, turning their fear into blame. Elder Kwasi approaches Adana's hut in the quiet twilight. His shoulders sag and his staff drags in the dust. A man burdened by truth. Inside her dimly lit hut, Adana and Elder Kwasi sit cross-legged on a woven mat. A single clay lamp flickers between them as they speak of guilt, spirits, and redemption. A close-up of Adana's face as she realizes the weight of the task before her. Her eyes glisten with a mix of grief, determination, and hope. Villagers gather beneath the burning sun, faces drawn from hunger and despair, while Adana and Elder Kwasi stand before the great Irako tree. Adana steps forward, hands raised, her voice trembling yet resolute as she begins to speak the forbidden truth before the entire village. As Adana tells the true story of Chief Obi's betrayal, some villagers gasp, while others lower their heads in shame. She describes the 30 betrayed warriors, and the silence thickens. A woman in the crowd drops to her knees in grief. The great Irako tree stands behind them, its dark sap bleeding down like old wounds reopening with every word. A child clutches her mother's wrapper, whimpering softly, as the weight of the truth settles over the village like a dark cloud. The sap of the tree is not a blessing, Adana said, her voice filled with solemn sorrow. It is the eternal weeping of the betrayed. A new elder, a woman named Elder Neka, stepped forward. So what is to be done? Do we abandon the tree? Do we cut it down? Adana looked at the Irako. To cut it down would be to destroy the only living witness. We must seek forgiveness, a ritual of atonement. For the next few days, the entire village worked as one. They wove new ceremonial cloths, not with victorious colors, but with somber browns and deep blues. They prepared a feast, not for celebration, but for an offering. They had no water, but they had their songs and sorrow. She held a carved wooden vessel filled with earth mixed with the blood from her own finger. A personal sacrifice, not taken but given. She began to chant the songs of sorrow, songs of Chief Femi's hope, the warrior's bravery, and the treachery that took their lives. Adana poured the blood-mixed earth into the ancient wound. We remember you. We ask for your forgiveness. A single heavy tear, not of crimson sap, but of clear, pure water, rolled down the trunk of the great Irako. Then another, and another. The next day, a gentle rain fell on Olorin, washing away the dark stain of old sap. The great Irako no longer bled crimson. The wound in its bark had closed, leaving behind only a silvery scar. The bleeding tree was no more. It had become the tree of reconciliation, a monument to truth and healing. Adana, once just a storyteller, had found the true heart of her people. Through truth, not myth, she had given them a new story, one that held pain, but also healing. The rains came, not as a curse, but as a blessing. The earth drank greedily, and the land responded with new life. Reconciliation had brought rebirth. The river that had once shrunk to a muddy trickle now surged with life, mirroring the hope restored in the hearts of the people. Once a year, on the Day of Atonement, the people of Olorin gathered, not to celebrate victory, but to remember the cost of silence. A new song was sung, one that honored both the courage and the betrayal, because healing demands the full story. Together, Adana, Kwasi, and Neka became keepers of the new truth, guardians of a history once hidden, now laid bare. Where once they used the bleeding sap, they now used water clean, life-giving, and earned not through suffering but honesty. You've done what I was too afraid to do, Kwasi whispered. You gave them truth, and with it, you made us whole. The tree of reconciliation stood tall, its silence no longer heavy with lies, but rich with redemption. And from its roots, a new story grew, one of courage, unity, and the power of truth. Adana sat beside the Irako tree, her hand resting gently on its silvery scar. The tree taught us that, elder. It cried out for us to listen. A gentle wind rustled the Irako leaves, a whisper, not a moan. The tree, once burdened by secrets, now stood as a gentle guardian of truth. The people of the sun arrived in Olorin, wary and silent. Their eyes scanned the land that once defied them. They wept when they heard Adana's song of sorrow and healing, sung beneath the scarred tree that once bled. The river between the villages no longer separated enemies. It had become a bridge of forgiveness. The story of the great Irako was no longer of blood and sorrow, but of forgiveness and shared humanity. Adana, now an elder, became the keeper of this new legend, one not of conquest, but of healing. The old scrolls once hidden in shame were now preserved in Olorin's sacred hall for all to learn from. Adana often sat by the tree's scar, listening not for sorrow, but for peace. A young storyteller from afar found her there one day, seeking the secret of Olorin's peace. Elder, the young man began, bowing respectfully. I have heard that your village has a sacred tree, but I have also heard that it once bled blood. Adana smiled, a slow, gentle smile that reached her eyes. The tree is a symbol of peace precisely because of its tragic history. We cannot have true peace if we do not first face our own lies. Only when we had the courage to admit our deceit did the tree have the courage to heal itself. So the tree, it was a living story? The young man asked, wonder dancing in his eyes. Every living thing is a story. We carry our histories, both triumphs and tragedies, in our hearts. The true test of our strength is not how well we forget the pain, but how well we remember and learn from it. The tree of Olorin is not the story of a single day, but of 1,000 years of truth. The young man listened, head bowed, the words sinking deep into his heart. He left Olorin not with a legend, but with a new understanding of truth and storytelling. The tree no longer needed to bleed. Its peace was now a living testament, a silent song that would echo for all time.